the most important lessons of my life, being married to Carla. There's a time early in our relationship where I didn't like her very much. We got married, and we had 1 year of marriage here we were in Virginia at the time, and we moved to Korea. And I decided that I wanted to be married to the ministry, not to my wife. So we ended up doing all kinds of things in Korea. Our son was born there, and we were there for a couple of years, and I came back. And I said, you know what? You can go to your parents, and I'm going to bachelor up the East Coast by myself and see my old friend from college, see my old mentor from my professor from college, and whatnot. And I had we both went to Liberty University, which is still there to this day, one of the largest Christian universities in the world. So, came back. She went to her parents in Georgia. I went up the East Coast, saw some friends, and I got to my professor's house and was talking to Doug. And I kept talking, and I kept talking, and I kept talking. And Doug just kept staring at me. And everything good? And Doug finally looked at me. He said, "What's your problem?" Like, what do you mean what my problem is? He said, "You have sat here and you told me all about the ministry, and yet you have a newborn son and a wife, and you've not said anything about them." He said, "You have a problem. You are married to the ministry and you're not married to your own family." He said, "You will have a ministry with your family or you will not have a ministry at all." And it just shocked me. And so I'm laying awake that night in his guest room, laying in the bed, and I'm thinking, I gotta be done with this trip. I gotta go back. He said, "Bacheloring up the East Coast? Why did you call yourself a bachelor? You're not a bachelor, you're a married man." Struck my heart, right? And I realized what I had been doing to Carla, that I had not been giving her my heart, and that I had not been giving her my all. For this reason, a man will leave his mother and father and cling to his wife. That's what Christ and the church is all about. And so driving back, tears streaming down my cheeks, realizing what I've been doing to my family, I kept hearing this song. Now, I'm going to tell my age when I tell you this song. Some of you probably have never heard of this song before. But it was Bryan Adams, "Everything I do for you." All right? And so the adults can appreciate that. And it just kept playing that song. And I'm like, oh my goodness, and that making me cry more, right? And there's nothing like being emotional and playing music that fits your emotion, right? Girls get it, guys over there, like, whatever, right? So here's the deal. I finally get to her parents' house. I drive up, and they're gone. And I'm really excited about that, right? So I'm frustrated. I'm like, I want to see my family. And so I said, well, I'll go see a movie. I'm a movie buff. I love movies. I'll just go see a movie, and maybe they'll be back by the time I'm done with the movie. I want to go see something to get my mind off of all this. So I'm going to go see Kevin Costner's Robin Hood. What I did not know was the song I had been listening to all along was that movie song. It came off the soundtrack of that movie. And I thought it was going to be an action movie, but it ended up being a love story about Robin Hood and Maid Marian and how they love one another and all that. I'm watching the movie and went, right? So I finally get out of the movie, go to her house, and they're home. And I'm just so excited to see my wife and my son. And I said, come here. I walk into the carport, right? And I said, come here. And she came out, And she's got this stone face, right? Anybody that knows Carla knows how sweet and loving she is, right? But with me, I had hardened her heart. I had hardened her heart so much, she just had a stone face. And I'm just weeping, and I'm telling her how sorry I am, and all that. And then her mother walked out. What's wrong with you? We got along really well, you know. What's wrong with you? I said, oh, I just missed your daughter. Yeah, right. And so I did not realize the change I needed to do until that moment. It really hit home, and I spent the last month, a month later, I spent the month just trying to show Carla how I was an idiot, how I was crazy, how I was married to the ministry, and we're now at my parents' house getting ready to go back to Korea. And she says, I don't want to go back. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I'm afraid if we go back, we're just going to end up in the same pattern again. And I remembered what my mentor told me. He said, when you get back to Korea, you're not there to prove yourself to your mission director. You're there to prove yourself to your family. And so we went back. We had the most wonderful year that year. And every year since that time, we've had ups, we've had downs. Ups and downs. But I'll never forget the change I had to make in my own life to consider the priorities of God. Now, the lesson you're going to hear today is one of the most powerful lessons in all the Bible. This is one of my favorite characters in the Bible. So who have we been talking about all along? A lot of them. We've been talking about a lot of different ones, right? All right, so let's review a little bit. We have some new people here today, so we'll review. We've been talking about God's story, a walk through the Bible to find your story. Most people think that the Bible is just a bunch of piled-on stories, they're just random stories all over the Bible. They're not random stories. No more disjointed stories. God's story in 3 2,000-year timelines. The first 2,000 years is what? Adam to Abraham, right? And in the whole time we're in Adam to Abraham, we're in what book of the Bible? Genesis. All the way to Genesis 11, we have the Tower of Babel, right? And then Genesis 12, it begins Abraham. And then the second part of the Bible is still in Genesis, but continues on through the Old Testament, and that's Abraham to Christ, okay? And so we have the prophecies of Christ at the end, that's all in the Old Testament. And then the final, the third 2,000 years that we have is from Christ till now, right? And we are at what point now? We're at the 6,000 years, aren't we? How many years has it been since Christ was here? 2,000 years. So we're at the end of the 2,000 years. We're at on the edge of the millennium to come. That's a whole other story, right? And that's the New Testament. So we have all these stories in the Bible that aren't disconnected at all. There's actually a pattern that goes through. And we've been talking about Abraham and his son, Isaac. Now, I made a mistake last week. Pastors make mistakes, and I make a lot of them. And last week I said that Isaac went and found Rebekah by a well, and she watered his camel. It was actually Abraham's servant that went and found her. And I knew that. I just started talking without reviewing the story that I should have done. And I also mentioned that Isaac had a son named, what was Isaac's son name? Son of the promise. He had 2 kids, Esau and Jacob. If you were at Sunday school, you should know this, right? Just came out of it, right? Jacob had how many kids? A lot. What did Jacob's name change to? Israel. He wrestled with the angel all night, dislocated his hip, right? And then he said, I will not let go of you unless you bless me. And the angel said, what's your name? He said, my name is Jacob. He said, your name will no longer be Jacob. It will be Israel, because you have wrestled with God and man, and you have prevailed. And so his children are known as the children of Jacob, the children of Israel. How many kids? How many tribes are in Israel? 12. Okay? So that's kind of where we're at. Last week you might remember that Robert Downey Jr. Looked like Iron Man, right? He's in love with Rachel. This is Jacob and Rachel. He wrestled with the angel, right? And then Jacob, this is where we pick up the story today, okay? So take your Bible, turn to Genesis 37. Genesis 37. We are at the very end of the first book of the Bible. It's hard to believe, isn't it? All right, why? We're still in the first book? Yes. Genesis 37. We're going to go all the way to 50 today. We're going to blast through these chapters very quickly. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to go fast. If you have questions, feel free to ask, but I might ignore you. Okay? All right, so beginning in Genesis 7, we have the story of Joseph, okay? Now, who is Joseph? Why are we focusing on Joseph and not Reuben? By the way, last week I said Simeon was the first kid. Reuben's the first kid, then Simeon. Why are we not focusing on the firstborn? Why isn't Reuben the one that we're talking about today? Why are we talking about Joseph, who's the final character of the patriarch in the book of Genesis? Why are we focused on Joseph? Anybody know? Huh? He was the favorite. Why was Joseph the favorite of Jacob? He was Rachel's first son, right? So Robert Downey Jr. loves Joseph the most, right? Because Rachel finally would give. There's something about women in the Bible that a lot of them seem to be barren. They can't have kids. And so it's comforting to me, to some level, for as many women as I've counseled over the years who struggle with having children, that they can actually identify with women in the Bible. Well, Rachel could not have kids. And men want children and women want children in the ancient days. It was a sign of legacy. It was a sign of prosperity, right? And it was so you always wanted to leave a legacy. We're not all hung up into that so much today. In fact, most people would rather have a dog than a kid. Many young people today say, a dog is just so much easier to keep up with. I would argue a cat is even easier to keep up with. Just put a litter box out and some food, and you're good to go, right? A dog, you got to take it for walks. It got to lick all over you. It loves you unconditionally, right? Cats are more independent. I favor independence personally, but anyway, regardless of how you feel about pets, in this day, in the ancient days, they didn't so much care about pets as they cared about the children that they were leaving the legacy with, right? And it was a very important thing. You can tell because you get to some chapters in the Bible and it's what? So-and-so beget so-and-so, so-and-so beget so-and-so. Like, can we just skip over this chapter? That was a huge meaning to them in the ancient days. We don't appreciate that today. Even as I'm saying this, you're like, yeah, get on with the story, right? I want to hear the story. I don't want to hear who begat who. Well, in this case, Joseph is the one who's focused because he's the firstborn of Jacob. Now, let's kind of walk through this. What about the firstborn of Jacob? Firstborn of Jacob with Rachel, okay? So, all the other brothers, there's no secret that Jacob shows favoritism toward Joseph, right? So Joseph, if you think you're the favorite kid, right, then you're like, yeah, I'm the one. And all kids think they're the favorite kid, right? Why? Because they usually are. If you got good parents, they don't show favoritism, all right? But the truth is, usually you get along with one kid better than the other in some way, right? And so we won't have that argument here. Let's just have the argument that Jacob showed favoritism to his son, Joseph, okay? He gets older and he gives him a coat. What kind of coat is this? Coat of many colors, right? The coat is beautiful. It usually the more colorful and the brighter it is, it meant you were the leader. So not only does he have the coat of many colors, he actually starts having these dreams where his brothers are bowing down to him. And he doesn't, that's not the kind of thing you tell people. Hey, I want you to know, I noticed you were bowing down to me. How do you think that would be received? Yeah. So he's kind of naive. He's kind of innocent and not smart, not real clever. He doesn't know the ways of the world. He's just a spoiled brat, right? He's just a spoiled brat. And so he's telling her, hey, I had this dream the other day. You're not going to believe it. It was awesome. Y'all were bowing down to me. Right? Just kind of this innocent, not real clever. And the brother, you just kind of see the look on their face, kind of like, all right? And then while he's not around, and they're like, this isn't cool. This isn't cool at all. Right? And so the brothers get angrier, jealous, and over time, they hatch this plan that they're going to take care of their brother. Right? And so what are they going to do? Anybody remember the story? What did they do to him? What? What, Kev?
Well, the first thing is
okay, so the first thing they do, they take off his coat. All right? The favorite thing that he had that made him the favorite, they took off his coat, and then they threw him in a pit, right? Now, these pits normally had water in them, and so probably at the bottom it might have been muddy, or it might have been completely dry, depending on the season or whatever. But he's in this pit, and they're like, we're going to kill him. And Reuben, the oldest, is like, pull the brake. Maybe we don't kill him, but maybe we just throw him in the pit, and then they got to talking among themselves and said, maybe we could just sell him. Because there's these traders that ride on these camels, these Ishmaelites. Who are the Ishmaelites? Peyton? They're people, yeah, very good. Yeah. They're not ghosts or animals or anything. So, now it starts coming around, right? Abraham, his first son, was Ishmael through Hagar, right? And they multiplied because God told Hagar, I will make your son a great nation also. And so now these guys are multiplying, and they're traders, and they live in the land of Midian. And I don't have a map, I'm not going to show you that, but the land of Midian becomes important later in the biblical story, all right? But we're not going to go there today. So these Ishmaelites, these Midianites, come by, and they're like, hey, we got a slave for you, right? We got this slave, and we just thought we would, if you're going to Egypt anyway, would you give us some money for him? Yeah, we'll give you 20 shekels of silver, right? A 2/5 ounce of silver today, which is nothing. But to them, it was a lot of money, right? So they do that, and then he ends up in Egypt, right? The Midianites take him, the Ishmaelites take him to Egypt, and they sell him to Potiphar. Everybody say Potiphar. Potiphar. Anybody gonna name their children Potiphar? Right? Hi, Potty, how are you? Good nickname. My cousin's name was Poopy. That was his nickname, Poopy. Right? Hey, Poopy, how are you? Anyway, Poti is probably not the most exciting name either, but it's an Egyptian name, Potiphar, and he was an official of the Pharaoh. And he was a very important man. He had a large estate, and he had a beautiful wife. And Joseph began to manage the affairs of Potiphar, and everything he did got blessed. And so Potiphar said, wow, God is blessing him in this area. In fact, turn to, I said 37, go to 39. Genesis 39. And we'll just start right at the beginning. And I'm going to do some of the reading because we got to blast through some of this stuff, okay? All right, right at the beginning. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his Egyptian master. Here we go. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all he did to succeed in his hands. Do Egyptians pay attention to one God? What are they known as? They were polytheistic, right? They had many gods. But this Egyptian noticed that the one God of the Hebrews, the one God, keep blessing this guy. And so I'll tell you what, all right? Verse 4. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and Potiphar made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. So what's Joseph in charge of now? Everything in Potiphar's house, right? Let's keep going. Verse 5, from the time he made him overseer in his house and over all he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all he had, and in his house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concerns about anything but the food he ate. Isn't that great? Typical man, right? I ain't worried about nothing. What you got to eat? Right? So all he cared about was his meat and potatoes, and wanted to know everything else was taken. He didn't even worry about anything else because Joseph had it under control, right? Now, here we go. Latter part of verse 6. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. So Joseph be looking good, right? He's not some fat dude, with balding, kind of like me, right? He's not like that. He's handsome. He's well built, right? And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he's put everything he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. Who's he been talking about the whole time? Who has Joseph been talking about the whole time just now? Potiphar. Notice what happens. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against, what does it say? God. I know who I belong to, and I know who I'm serving. Yes, Potiphar had done all this to me, but ultimately I know that I serve God. That is a massive lesson for us to understand. You may be doing your homework because you know the teacher expects it of you. You may be doing things around the house because you know your parents expect it of you. You may have a job because you know you got to get a paycheck to take care of your family. You may do all these things. Your children are counting on you, whatever the case. You may know all these things, but ultimately, who are we serving? God. Joseph, notice, he's not bitter. I ain't believing I'm here. My brother, I'm not even home anymore. I was my dad's favorite. And here I am in Egypt, stuck over here. Is he talking like that? And now I got this woman on my case every day trying to get me to go to bed with her. Man. A worldly man might think otherwise, right? Not Joseph. Because who was he serving? Serving God. Okay? All right. As she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her. So it didn't happen just one time. This is not a one-time thing. She went on and on and on and on, right? But he refused, all right? So verse 11, but one day when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the other men of the house were there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. Oops. One thing you don't want to leave is evidence, right? Did she use it against him? You bet. Verse 13. As soon as she saw he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household. She said to them, see, he, talking about Potiphar, had brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me and lied with me, and I cried out in a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I was screaming, I lifted up my voice and cried out. He left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Is she telling the truth? No. No. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. She told him the same story, saying, the Hebrew servant you have brought among us, and she basically said the same thing over again. So Potiphar's excited about this, right? Hey, I gave you everything. Now you're trying to take my wife. What did he do? Has Joseph arrested, puts him in jail, right? Now, he's already lost his home. He lost the favor of his brothers. He was unjustly treated by his brothers, sold into slavery. Now he goes to Egypt, and now, okay, at least God's blessing him. And now that's been taken away. Fairly or unfairly? Unfair 2 times. Now, I don't know about you, but I can handle things when it's my fault. I tell myself all the time, Darren, you're such an idiot. If you'd have just done this instead of this, you should have known better. You got yourself into trouble, right? No problem. But when it's unfair, and somebody else does it to me, or a situation happens that shouldn't have happened to me, no, I get a little upset about that. And so here's Joseph. He had it happen twice. His brothers mistreating, no fault of his own, other than being naive, I guess. And then now, he's been honest with God. The whole time he's honoring God with his life, and still God allows it to happen to him? He should abandon God, shouldn't he? He ought to tell God, forget you! What kind of God do I serve? Doesn't take care of me. Isn't that what he should do? He ends up in jail. And he does so well in jail that the master of the jail is like, hey, this guy's good at administration. I'm going to put him in charge of the jail.
Oh, no.
Well, that's what I wanted, to be in charge of jail while I'm in jail, right? But not only am I a jailbird, I'm actually doing the job of the people who are in charge of the jail. I'm having, as a jailbird, to do their job. He has an argument, doesn't he? What does he do? For the glory of God, he does his very best. And as he does his very best, 2 guys show up in jail. Okay? The king, the Pharaoh's cupbearer, and the Pharaoh's baker. And I don't think the candlestick maker showed up. You adults will understand that. You young people are like, what are you talking about, right? So these two guys show up, right? These are the Pharaoh's servants. One is the baker, and one is the cupbearer, okay? And they have this dream, right? And they have this dream, and both of them have two different dreams. And I'm looking at the time here. I may have to stretch this out. They have a dream, and basically Joseph says, I'm going to tell you what the dream means. You're going to die, and you're going to live. You're going to be returned to you're going to be returned to the Pharaoh's court as the cupbearer, but as the baker, you're going to die. Pharaoh's going to kill you. Well, that's an exciting thing to hear, right? And it happens. It actually happens. And he tells the cupbearer, when you are restored to Pharaoh, don't forget me. Did it happen? The baker ends up getting killed by Pharaoh. The cupbearer gets restored by Pharaoh. Does the cupbearer remember Joseph? No. Joseph could be there 3 times now. 3 times. Unfair, unfair, unfair. Years go by. And then Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh had this weird dream. And Pharaoh has this dream where these fat cows come out of the Nile. Now, what is the Nile River to the Egyptians? The source of life. The source of life. And these fat cows come out of the Nile. And then these skinny cows come out of the Nile, and they eat the fat cows. Skinny cows eat the fat cows and remain skinny. Then he had another dream. These large, plump heads of wheat on one stalk, they come out, and then these other skimpy-looking pieces of wheat come up, and they eat the fat wheat. And Pharaoh's like, huh? Now, to us today, we have a dream, we're like, oh, duh, man. And that's it. In ancient times, as typical, things were different. A lot of times, dreams meant something. They thought the gods were trying to tell them something. Pharaohs always had a court of advisors. They had a court of magicians. They had a court of, divine people, if you want to call them that, people, witches, warlocks, whatever you want to call them, right? And so he says, hey, can anybody interpret the dream? No one could interpret the dream, and it disturbed a lot of people. Now, what happened was the cupbearer, who had forgotten Joseph, now remembered, oh yeah, there's this guy named Joseph in the jail. And he told Pharaoh, this guy interpreted our dream, and if no one else can do it, maybe he could do it. All right? And so Joseph shows up to the Pharaoh, right? And this is after he does his service for the Pharaoh. But Joseph shows up to the Pharaoh. He says, what's your dream? It says fat cow, skinny cows. Fat grain, skinny grain. And Joseph said, I'll tell you exactly what that means. He said, your 7 fat cows mean for the next 7 years, Egypt is going to flourish with crops. We're going to have so much, it's going to be insane. But the skinny cows coming out means that for the following 7 years, famine will come upon the land, and people are going to be starving. Same thing with the wheat. It's the same dream. Here's what you should do, O king. Now here's Joseph doing a little bit of self-promotion, but let's watch what happens. So he said, what you really should do, O king, is find somebody who knows what they're doing, who's the wisest of all, to store up all the grain during the 7 years so that when the bad 7 years come, you'll have enough grain and you won't die. In the archaeological record, in the ancient time, there was a series of rulers over the Nile River known as nomes. Not G-N, but N-O-M-E-S, nomes. They were equal in power. But they noticed in Egyptian history, almost overnight, that the Pharaoh around the Memphis area, not Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis, Egypt, that Pharaoh became rich overnight and all the other gnomes did not. And they can't explain it. They don't know why. Interesting. I'm going to show you a video here. The one that says archaeological, not the other one. No, not that one. The other one. It starts with archaeological.
400 kilometers south of Alara, the tomb of Benihana
About 4 minutes long.
dates to 1700 BCE. Because no one has looked for evidence of the Exodus in this period, the tomb has never been linked to the biblical story. And yet, there is a perfectly preserved wall painting here that records an ancient migration into Egypt from the area of modern Israel. As in the Bible, the scene involves bearded Semites riding donkeys and bringing their families and flocks into Egypt. Like the biblical Israelites, they are wearing multicolored tunics. The hieroglyphic inscription on this wall calls these people the Am, God's people. Looking in the right place, during the right time, we are the first to recognize a veritable snapshot of the migration of the biblical Israelites to Egypt. The Bible records that at the time of their arrival, one Israelite rose to the highest levels of Egyptian power. His name was Joseph, son of Yaakov, Jacob in English, and he became so powerful that he wore on his finger the seal of royal authority. Discovering Joseph's seal at Avaris would prove that the Israelites arrived here exactly when our timeline predicts. That would be by finding a needle in a 3,700-year-old archaeological haystack.
Watch this.
Incredibly, the tiny seal was found precisely at the archaeological layer we anticipated. In fact, Professor Manfred Bita found no less than 9 seals worn by Joseph's court officials. Inscribed right on them is the Hebrew name Yaakov, Joseph's father.
It's very strange that we found 9 seals with the name Yaakov here. It's biblically made, by the way. The original was probably mounted on the ring or on the finger. And this gives us a new puzzle.
Is it really a puzzle? Not if one uses our chronology. This is the only time that a Hebrew name appears on an Egyptian royal seal. It directly connects Avaris with the Bible. Professor Bitak steers clear of biblical chronology. He's under the constant watch of the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, who have made Avaris off limits to the public. Supposedly for conservation reasons, Professor Bitak has been forced to cover up his dig every single year. The area has been plowed, seeded, and cultivated by local farmers. No one would suspect that underneath these fields lies an archaeological treasure trove that proves the biblical Exodus.
All right, so there's another video as well that we don't have time to show, but back to the story itself. People say all the time, there's no such thing as the Israelites being in Egypt. Archaeologists to this day, scientists will say there's no proof of it at all. Yet we have proof They just think that that's someone else. That's a different tribe of people. If Joseph had been angry with God and did not see what was happening in his life as something that God was doing, and that no matter what, how unfair it would be, there would be no Israel today. There would be no change of life today. And so here's what I want you to understand. The most powerful story in Scripture, of course, is Christ, who was treated the most unfairly. If anyone deserved to be given, taken off the hook, so to speak, it would be Jesus, right? And so here's the most powerful lesson. All right, look at me. Every eyeball, look at me. Let me see your eyeballs. You ready? Let me see. Look at me, look at me, look at me. The most powerful lesson you can understand is that even when your life is not going the way you think it should go, God is working in spite of what you think. But you can stop God from working if you become bitter and angry over what happens in your life. Did you hear what I just said? God may not make your life turn out the way you would like for it to. Well, this didn't happen, or I didn't meet this person, or this situation I didn't get the promotion I was looking for. I didn't get the grades I was looking for. I didn't have the right boyfriend, the right girlfriend. I didn't have the right spouse. I didn't have this, that, or the other. Let me tell you something. What happens, happens for a reason. And God is always behind it, whether you believe it or not. So who needs to change, God or you? Bow your heads with me, if you will. This is by far one of the most critical lessons of life, is the lesson of Joseph. No matter how many unfair things happen to you, thank God that they happen. I have seen tragedy firsthand. I've lost family members that I should not have lost. I've seen depression over the most unfair things, and I understand it. But the Bible says, regardless of your circumstances, regardless of what's happening to you, give God the glory, because He is at work in a very special way. And you will be held accountable one day for how you respond to the things that happen to you. And so God calls us to rejoice. 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 Take joy in your suffering, brothers. Take joy in spite of the things that may happen to you. Doesn't matter. Take joy. Quit complaining, quit grumbling, quit being always negative about stuff. Say, God, I get it. I get it. I know you've allowed these things to happen for my own character, for my own building up, and for good to come. Because Joseph told his brothers, he said, you meant it for evil. God meant it for good. You may say here today, Darren, I walked in today and I've been upset about some things. I've been frustrated over some things. I need to learn this lesson. I need to learn it. Whether you're an adult or a young person here today, I need to learn this lesson. If that's the desire of your heart, to learn this lesson today, to take it to heart, not just know it in your head, but to take it to heart. Father, thank you for the story of Joseph. Thank you for his attitude. Thank you for how he opens our eyes, that no matter what happens, you are working behind the scenes, even if it doesn't look like it in the moment. Even if there's no evidence in front of me. Lord, I pray that I would turn my heart towards you. And I would stop complaining about life and start embracing life with joy and the beauty of Christ flowing through me. Yet not I, but Christ through me, Lord, to have joy and to be thankful and to lift your name high in all circumstances. Help us not only to learn this in our minds, Lord, but in our hearts and in our very being, to invite you into everything that we do, knowing that you're taking us on a path that we have no idea the joy that has been set before us. And like Christ, he endured the cross for the joy set before him. May we be like Jesus. In his powerful, wonderful, beautiful name we pray these things. Everybody said? Amen. Amen.